Hey there, UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Welcome back to the Cult of UFO. Today, we're going to be diving into one of the most intriguing and controversial alien abduction cases of the 20th century, the Manhattan Alien Abduction. Grab your tinfoil hats though, because this story is wilder than a haggis eating contest in a Glasgow pub. Now, before we begin, let me remind you that here at Sgt Grumpy's, we are all about looking at the evidence. As a former police sergeant, I've seen my fair share of tall tales, but I've also encountered some genuinely unexplained phenomena. So let's approach this with an open mind. But keep your skeptical spectacles as firmly in place. Let's start with the cast. First up, we've got Linda Napolitano, the woman at the centre of this cosmic kerfuffle. Linda had given up a promising singing career, and she'd become a New York housewife and mother. And this might be important later on. Linda then was just your average New Yorker until that fateful night in November 1989 when she claims she was whisked away by aliens right out of her 12th floor apartment window. Now that's a really unexpected late night pickup. Next, enter Bud Hopkins, a prominent figure in UFO research circles. And Hopkins wasn't just any old UFO enthusiast, he was an accomplished artist, and he'd traded his paintbrush for a UFO detector. Bud held abduction support groups in his home, and it was an open house with people coming and going on a daily, if not even hourly basis. He took on Linda's case and became her biggest advocate, using hypnotic regression to help her recover memories of the alleged abduction. Now, as a former police officer, I can tell you that hypnosis is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot, especially when it comes to evidence, but we'll get into that later. And then enter Carol. Carol is Bud Hopkins' wife, now his ex-wife, and a vocal critic of Linda's claims. Carol was a documentary filmmaker in her own right and had left the West Coast when Bud had encouraged her to come and live with him in New York. She had done so and supported his work through her medium of film and was involved in his UFO research. But she's later to become one of his most outspoken skeptics about the Manhattan Alien Abduction case. Think of her as a cosmic party pooper, if you will, and the piece de resistance, the security detail of Richard and Dan. They add another layer of intrigue to the Manhattan Alien Abduction case. And according to Bud Hopkins, these two men were supposedly guarding Javier Perez de Cajou, the UN Secretary General, when they witnessed Linda Napolitano's abduction. Now, this forms the core of the story. Each of these people play a crucial role in shaping the narrative of the Manhattan Alien Abduction. It's a tale filled with more twists and turns than a Highland Road. And just like a good Scottish whisky, it only gets more intriguing with time. So settle down, keep your eyes on the skies, and let's dive into this bizarre world of this alien abduction. The truth is out there. Maybe. So the claim. Our story begins on November the 30th, 1989, in the heart of the Big Apple. Linda Napolitano, the Manhattan resident, claimed she was abducted by aliens right out of her 12th floor apartment window. Her closed apartment window. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sgt Grumpy, that's nuttier than a squirrel's winter stash. I get where you're coming from, but don't get your sporran twisted, it gets even more bizarre. According to Linda, she was levitated out the window and beamed up into a spaceship that was hovering over the city, New York City. Once aboard, she says the aliens conducted experiments on her, and like a scene straight out of a sci-fi movie, isn't it? But Linda insists it really happened. So enter Bud Hopkins. Linda's looking for assistance, sees Bud Hopkins' abduction support group, and goes along. And this is where Bud, a key figure in UFO research, who, as we've said, wasn't your typical UFO investigator, because he'd already developed theories about missing time and believed aliens were conducting genetic experiments on humans. He was very empathic with his subjects and his support groups and was happy to give people the abduction story as an answer to the questions they were seeking. Was this ethical? Was he so wrapped up in wanting to believe that he became too involved? Did he become an initiator rather than an investigator? He took on Linda's case and used hypnotic regression to help her recover memories of the abduction. And I've got to give a word of caution here. Most psychologists view hypnotic regression as unreliable at best and capable of producing false memories at worst. It's like trying to remember what you had for breakfast 3 years ago. Your mind automatically fills in the blanks with what you think you should have eaten rather than what you actually did eat. So let's look at the evidence. And remember, this is described as the most credible abduction story ever. So Linda and Hopkins claim that there were 23 witnesses to the abduction. That's more witnesses than an SNP Freedom rally. But here's the kicker. None of these witnesses have ever been publicly identified or verified. Even Linda's son didn't want to show his face on camera in the Netflix doc. There's also talk of an implant in Linda's nose. But, hey, the alien souvenirs vanished before it could be examined. It's like when your dog eats your homework. It's convenient, but it's not very convincing.
The dog ate my homework.
Here we go again.
The dog ate my homework.
Here we go again.
The dog ate my homework.
Here we go again.
We've also got testimonies from the alleged security detail, Richard and Dan, who say they saw the whole thing, but these testimonies only come through letters, and no one's ever going to be able to verify if these guards actually exist. In fact, some handwriting analysis suggests that Linda might have written these letters herself. Talk about a plot twist. There was also the issue of Linda's sister, who called Bud to back up part of Linda's claim. But Bud, after the call, put down the phone and turned to his wife Carol and said, "That's strange. Linda's just phoned me pretending to be her sister." The UN connection. So, Richard and Dan weren't alone when they witnessed this. According to them, they were there with Javier Perez de Cajur, who was the UN Secretary General. I apologise for mispronouncing his name. So apparently they all witnessed this abduction at that time. But when asked about it, Javier denied any knowledge of the incident. So it's a bit like claiming the Queen saw you fight off the Loch Ness Monster. It's a bold statement, but it's going to be really hard to prove. Well, let's go back to the security detail. The plot thickened because in April 1991, Richard and Dan kidnapped Linda, an event that raised even more eyebrows among skeptics. To cap off this bizarre twist, Richard then purportedly declared his undying love for Linda, claiming he'd fallen for her and had fantasised about kidnapping her. There was even a suggestion that Richard was known to her from before she met her husband, but from a dream state? Or was it on a shared abduction? This romantic subplot adds yet another controversial element to an already contentious case. It further blurs the lines between reality and fiction. Security guards' involvement from their initial witness accounts to the alleged kidnapping and love confession? It remains one of the most disputed and perplexing aspects of Linda Napolitano's story. And at this point, at the risk of sounding slightly misogynist, do I have to think, is this a fabrication of a bored housewife who has dreamt this up to try and recapture some semblance of, not fame, but just something that makes her the centre of attention? Or am I overreaching, much like anybody else could be? But let's hear from Carol. What about Carol, the ex-wife, or the now ex-wife, and now deceased, unfortunately? She was married to Bud, and she became a very vocal critic of Linda's claims. She accused Linda of fabricating the whole story, suggesting it was all about fame and financial gain. She even participated in the Netflix documentary about the case. And she presented a very sceptical perspective. Was Carol, though, just a jealous wife? Was she concerned about the amount of time that Bud was spending trying to help Linda come to terms with her experience? Or did she have a point? Remember, Carol was a documentary filmmaker in her own right before she met Bud. And I would suspect she may well have had a good sense of whether someone was genuine or not. And then after the Netflix documentary comes out, the lawsuit follows. It stirred up quite a hornet's nest. Linda wasn't happy with how she was portrayed. She filed a lawsuit against Netflix and others involved in the production. She claims she was deceived by the producers and misrepresented in the series. So what do we make of all this? We've got a wild story, very questionable evidence, and a whole lot of controversy. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half from a different box. As always, I encourage you to look at the evidence and draw your own conclusions. Go and watch the Netflix documentary if you wish. There's plenty of other material on this. You have to gather a lot of material in order to make sound and valid conclusions, in my view. But most of this isn't evidence-based. So is this a case of overactive imagination? Was she bored of that regular life that she'd picked over her previous burgeoning music career? Was it maybe idle daydreaming and subconscious frustrations that then were brought to life by Bud and his hypnosis techniques? Having listened to the phrasing of the questions that Bud uses, or dare I say, suggestions, during these sessions, it seems to me that he was perhaps inadvertently, fueling what may have started as episodes of sleep paralysis, or even, that those strange dreams you have between waking and sleeping, and blown them into a full-blown abduction narrative by using his hypnosis techniques here. During this research, I've been applying my previous training in investigation, interrogation, and questioning to seek an evidence-based conclusion. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of actual evidence. It's all hearsay. None of the witnesses have come forward. None of them have been verified and identified. The letters from the unidentified security detail may have been written by Linda herself. The UN Secretary General firmly denies any such involvement. The hypnosis sessions, which we've already stated are problematical, both as a medium for eliciting the truth and for the way that he led the witnesses. I'm personally very disappointed in this, especially as it's heralded as one of the most credible UFO abduction cases ever. And in fact, it doesn't bode well if the UFO community believes this. What do you think? Am I off the mark? Is there other evidence I've missed? Let me know in the comments below. Until then, keep your eyes on the skies, your feet on the ground, and your skeptical spectacles firmly in place. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And remember, the truth is out there. Maybe.